carb.ca.gov.
Y una vez que haya seleccionado su idioma preferido, hay un segundo paso para poder ver la presentación, ya sea en inglés o en español. En la parte superior de su ventanilla de Zoom, verá una opción que dice View Options o Ver opciones. Será la parte derecha, una barra verde. De ahí puede seleccionar diapositivas en español para verlo en español o English Slides para verlo en inglés. Igual, si tiene alguna dificultad técnica, por favor envíe un correo electrónico a buildingdecarb@arb.ca.gov. Thank you, Dana. Back to you.
Thanks, Mark. And just a reminder, we are recording this workshop today. So thanks again for joining us. The slides are available on our website, and we will post a recording of this workshop soon. There are 6 sections to today's workshop. Our goal for the introduction is really to share an overview of our motivation, guiding values, key complementary policies moving forward, and revisit our timeline to develop zero-emission space and water heater standards. We would also like to inform the public on what we've learned from our public engagement work so far. We also plan to consult with the public on our initial regulatory concepts that are under development. We also plan to share updates on the key guiding questions that are guiding our staff work underway to develop the regulatory concepts. And finally, we will have an opportunity to provide public comments on the information that we're sharing today. And then we'll close with some next steps. So there will be several opportunities to engage during the workshop today. We won't have the chat feature enabled to avoid any kind of side conversations that may be distracting. We really do want to focus the attention on the conversations during the workshop today. However, we do have the Q&A feature that will allow attendees to post questions. We'll provide some time for polling as well, so that everybody can participate in the workshop. And lastly, as I mentioned, towards the end of the workshop, we'll have a public comment period. So I just want to remind everybody to please use respectful language. Everybody attending today is joining because we feel invested in this topic. There's a lot of different perspectives, so let's take care of each other and be respectful. With that, we can move on to our next slide. Great. So this is some background on our motivation, given that buildings are responsible for a significant portion of statewide greenhouse gas emissions. Zero-emission space and water heater standards really do provide an opportunity for substantial emission reductions from buildings to help us meet our climate and our air quality targets. The standards are part of California's climate strategy as laid out in the 2022 scoping plan. We also committed to developing zero-emission greenhouse gas standards for new space and water heaters when the board approved our 2022 state strategy for the state implementation plan, which was developed to assist with meeting air quality standards and improving public health. Right now, we are currently defining zero emission as zero greenhouse gas emissions emitted during operation. During our first workshop, we did have a brainstorming exercise where we invited participants to share words or phrases that they felt should be included in our list of values to guide the development of our potential zero-emission space and water heater standards. Comments included themes related to climate change mitigation, economic impacts, affordability, equity and justice, environmental health, process, funding, and technology. So in response to the feedback from that workshop, as well as our learnings from a Sacramento State assessment report, which was conducted to develop our outreach and engagement strategy and plan, we've defined these guiding values, which really describe our intentions and approach for this work. And we will continue to reference them as we consider our regulatory design and plan for potential implementation. If you do want more details on the guiding values, they can be found in our outreach and engagement strategy and plan. Great. Okay, so achieving a successful and equitable building decarbonization is going to require a range of complementary policies from multiple agencies moving forward. The first key policy area is advancing building codes. California really is leading the nation with the state energy code. There is also an opportunity to adopt zero-emission building standards for new construction as part of the Cal Green Code. Local building codes can also play a role in advancing zero-emission buildings, providing they meet the requirements for building code exemption under the Federal Energy Policy and Conservation Act. Establishing appliance standards is another important policy area. South Coast and Bay Area air districts are adopting and proposing rules to mandate zero NOx space and water heaters regionally. Our team at CARB is working on statewide zero greenhouse gas rules for space and water heaters. Additionally, CARB as well as US EPA already have global warming potential limits in place for space conditioning equipment, and CARB will also consider regulatory measures to address the refrigerants used in water heaters and other heat pumps. Building a just and sustainable market is another key policy area. California Energy Commission and the California Public Utilities Commission really are focused on equitable building decarbonization. CEC is overseeing direct install programs in disadvantaged communities, and CPUC is overseeing pilot programs as well. CPUC proceedings relating to energy rate design set goals to promote affordability for consumers, as well as reducing greenhouse gas emissions from grid power. CPUC is also overseeing the Switches On campaign to increase consumer awareness and adoption. Strategic planning is another important policy area that can really help to ensure the grid is ready, that infrastructure funding is aligned, that the gas system is pruned, and that the workforce is developed to accommodate a transition to zero-emission space and water heaters. Here's a look at the work that CPUC, California Energy Commission, and the Workforce Development Board are focused on within this space. There are other building decarbonization complementary policies that are not shown here for simplicity, such as energy efficiency, existing building performance standards, technology demonstration programs, and support for manufacturing. But we did want to highlight some of these very important complementary policies. Here's a look at our overall timeline. Today, we're sharing some of our initial regulatory concepts and more detail on our staff work. We are planning another public workshop in the summer or fall of 2024, and we still anticipate taking a staff proposal regarding zero-emission space and water heaters to the board for consideration in 2025. And the potential compliance date is still likely in the 2030 timeframe. So with that, I would like to pass it to my colleague Emma Tomei to discuss public engagement.
Thank you, Dana. Before I dive in, just as a reminder, to access the slides in your language of choice, you can click the View Options button in black at the top of your screen, and you'll see Diapositivas en Español if you want to see the slide in Spanish, or English slides if you want to view the English version. And there is also an interpretation button you can click to access the presentation in English or Spanish. So alongside our partners at other agencies, we're really committed to being in dialogue with the public throughout the process of developing a proposed regulations so that our recommendations can be informed by many forms of real-world industry and research expertise. And so we can share high-quality information about our analysis and proposals to address public questions and concerns. Our goal for this portion of the agenda is to share some progress updates on our public engagement work and our plans for engagement opportunities this year. Before diving in, we'd just like to get a better sense of who is in the room today, your past experience engaging with CARB, and what's motivated you to join the workshop. So you should now see a polling question on your screen or mobile device. Our first question is, how many CARB public meetings have you attended previously? If this is your first CARB public meeting, if you've been to 1 to 7, or if you've been to 8 or more. Our second question is, what best describes your professional sector? And so there's several sectors listed. So please choose the one that best describes you. And if you don't see one there, you can choose other. We'll also have a survey at the end of the workshop where you can give us more information about where you're coming from and your interests. And our third question is, which workshop topic is of the greatest interest to you? Our motivation for establishing standards, the public engagement process, regulatory concepts, staff analysis, and our public comment opportunity. So I'll wait a few more moments as folks are sharing their responses. Okay, since the responses have slowed down, go ahead and share the results. So almost a quarter of attendees are here at their first CARB public meeting. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We had about the same amount of first-time CARB public meeting attendees at our first workshop, and it's really encouraging to see that we're continuing to draw in folks who are new to this process, and we hope that you get the information that you need today. And thank you to the diehard CARB public meeting attendees, 8 or more. We really appreciate your ongoing engagement. In terms of the sectors that we see represented today, I'm noticing that there are comparatively more folks coming from the nonprofit or government and public sector. Also, a number of manufacturers are here with us today, as well as those in the energy industry and other sector, but we're not seeing any contractors or installers who have joined the workshop today. And then finally, in terms of the workshop topic that's of the greatest interest, far and away, folks are interested in learning about our regulatory concepts. With that, I'll stop sharing the poll results and continue on with the presentation. Okay, I do see that there's a raised hand already. Just as a reminder, we'll pause for public comments closer to about 10 a.m. In the meantime, please feel welcome to submit any questions you might have via the Q&A feature. So thanks for your patience as we provide some of this material up front. So our public engagement work kicked off last May with our first public workshop. And after that workshop, staff from the Sacramento State Consensus and Collaboration Program conducted nearly 40 individual and group interviews with different potentially impacted people, organizations, and businesses. And Sac State finished their assessment report in October, which detailed interested parties' wishes for the standards development process and recommendations to CARB staff for topics to address in our analysis and engagement work. This slide shows some general highlights from Sac State's independent report. In general, we were reassured to see many of the areas we had planned to address in our analysis echoed in the comments shared by interviewees. So we've organized our presentation today around some of these big questions. In addition to the questions named here, the assessment report contains many helpful recommendations and guidance around implementation considerations, which we aim to address in the context of more specific regulatory proposals later this year. We've also heard several requests and desires related to CARB's process, interagency coordination central among them. Dana just provided a general overview of other agency efforts to decarbonize buildings. We currently coordinate by meeting regularly with other agency staff to discuss our analysis approaches and tracking their policy development and program implementation work, especially as it relates to our potential regulation timeline. As part of potential implementation planning, we recognize the need to strengthen this coordination work as we communicate our learnings from this engagement process and find opportunities to include other agency staff. Coordination is at the heart of another key request we heard, which was to consider potential standards within a holistic frame of mind that includes potential health, climate, and economic benefits, and acknowledges how challenges complying with the regulation could vary within different building conditions, renter-owner status, and more. Another core process request we heard was offering opportunities for funded engagement. I'll share more about our efforts here in the next slides as I go over our engagement phases and next steps. And finally, participants in the assessment process also highlighted the risk of misinformation, and we hope that today's and future workshops can help provide clear updates and address your questions. So as I just mentioned, the Sacramento State-led assessment process spanned last summer and fall, and their report formed the foundation of the staff outreach and engagement strategy and plan we published in December. We've since begun additional informal engagement work, which includes 3 overlapping tracks that are punctuated by broader public workshop updates like today's. So first, we're holding focused meetings with public experts to inform our staff analysis approach, seeking their guidance and feedback on the staff analysis methods you'll hear more about later today. Then, starting this summer, we'll co-host listening sessions with partner organizations in various areas of the state to hear feedback on regulatory proposals. In the fall, we'll begin planning for potential implementation to inform future actions and start to address many of the implementation-related questions raised in the assessment process. We're fortunate to have a strong group of public experts that are involved in and supporting this additional engagement work. Before introducing our public experts, I'll note that with the support of Sac State, we will also incorporate ongoing and concluding opportunities to evaluate how these engagement activities are working. Public experts will be a critical part of this evaluation, sharing their takeaways from this process and recommendations for the future. We recently held a solicitation to invite members of the public or public experts to be involved in greater depth beyond this kind of public workshop space by engaging in smaller, less formal, focused meetings regarding staff analysis, by co-hosting listening sessions in their communities, and by discussing implementation planning considerations with CARB staff. A huge thank you to everybody who applied. We've also offered funding opportunities for community-based organizations or other economically disadvantaged individuals who would need financial support to participate. Potential participants are coming from areas across the state, including rural Northern California to the Bay Area, the Central Valley, Los Angeles, and San Diego, and include those from industry, community advocates, workforce and housing experts, organizations with a long history of program implementation, and more. We really appreciate everybody who's lending their expertise to this process. So this slide includes a partial list of the public experts who we've invited to participate and might be subject to future changes. So we'll keep an updated list on our website. We'll share more on events to come at the close of the workshop, but for now, I'll hand it back to Dana to discuss our regulatory concepts.
Thanks, Emma. So,
Dana, I'm having some trouble hearing you. I think bring your microphone.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thank you so much. Great. So we're planning to share 2 regulatory concepts today, both of which are focused on space and water heating, which make up the vast majority of building-related emissions. We do anticipate that manufacturers would be the primary regulated entity. So the main goals of sharing our regulatory concepts during today's workshop is really to consult the public on what aspects seem feasible and challenging. And during the public comment period of this workshop, we will raise these questions again. We'll also be looking for any data to support public comments. So our first regulatory concept is one that we included in our air quality planning document, the 2022 State SIP strategy. The basic concept would require all new sales of space and water heaters for both residential and commercial buildings to be zero emission starting in 2030. This concept would apply to all types of space and water heaters with no limits on the size of equipment. This standard would not be an in-use requirement. So in other words, people could still repair their existing equipment and would not be required to replace space and water heaters by any specific target date. So one of the main benefits of this concept is that it would meet the emission reduction estimate outlined in CARB's air quality plan, the 2022 state SIP strategy. We are also aware that there is currently limited zero emission product availability for larger buildings and applications that require hot water for sanitation. We do expect that product availability for larger buildings and hot water disinfection will expand in the future. Our second regulatory concept would be based on scaling up the adopted Bay Area measure and the proposed South Coast Zero NOx rules for space and water heaters, including compliance dates based on equipment type and size. The first 2 rows with 2027 and 2029 effective dates are aligned with the Bay Area's adopted rules. Boilers and water heaters with heating capacity less than 75,000 BTUs per hour are typically referring to storage water heaters in smaller building types. Central furnaces with a heating capacity below 175,000 BTUs per hour are those found in smaller buildings, generally under 4,000 square feet, depending upon the climate. The remaining rows have implementation dates aligned with the latest proposal from South Coast. South Coast has proposed that the market is ready for boilers and water heaters up to 400,000 BTUs per hour and instantaneous water heaters up to 200,000 BTUs per hour to be zero emission starting in 2029. South Coast has also proposed a 2031 implementation date for larger boilers, water heaters, instantaneous water heaters, and pool heaters. While the Bay Area excluded pool heaters from their requirements, South Coast is proposing to include them because they are a significant source of smog-forming NOx emissions in South Coast. The other item to note with this regulatory concept is that there is a later 2033 target date for high temperature boilers and water heaters that is also aligned with South Coast's current proposal. The main benefit of this concept is that it provides harmonized standards statewide, along with considerable emission reduction potential. However, emission reduction benefits would be delayed for some equipment types and earlier for others due to those staggered implementation dates. So now that I've shared the regulatory concepts, we would like to learn more about workshop attendees' personal experience with zero emission space and water heaters. So we do have a poll that we'd like folks to participate in. There are 2 questions here. The first question is, do you anticipate installing a zero emission water heater within the near term, or do you already have one in your home or business? And the second one is related to zero emission space heating, and if you plan to install one soon or if you already have one in your home or business. So thank you everyone for responding. I see lots of people are adding in their responses now. Great. Okay. Now that things are slowing, maybe we can end the poll and see the results. Great. It looks like nearly half of people aren't quite sure if they're planning to install a zero emission water heater. 20% of folks already have a zero emission water heater. And similarly, it's about the same for space heating. Nearly 20% already have a zero emission space heater. Half of workshop attendees aren't quite sure if they're gonna install one, but about 20% are also planning to install within 1 to 5 years. So it's really helpful to see the range of personal experience in the workshop today. You know, it's helpful for us to see that so many people have already installed zero emission space and water heaters in their home and business. So at this point, I'd like to pass it off to my colleague Sam Lerman to present some of our staff work that's underway.
Great. Well, thank you, Dana. So now I will walk through key questions that are guiding our analytical work. As we consider each regulatory concept, we are aiming to answer the following questions through our staff analysis. These include, what are the potential emission reductions, and how does our measure impact climate change, air quality, and public health? Will zero-emission technology be widely available? Will buildings be ready to install zero-emission space and water heating? What are the costs to regulated parties, and what are the cost impacts to consumers? And then central to all these guiding questions is assessing the equity implications of a potential measure. We aim to incorporate equity and environmental justice throughout the development of the standards. Our main goals for today are to share an update on the staff work underway and inform the public on baseline GHG emissions and potential public health benefits of space and water heating, and to consult the public on the guiding questions, methods, and data sources we are following to get feedback on the proposed approach for our technology, building readiness, costs, and regional equity analyses. Please keep these questions in mind as we walk through this section. There will be an opportunity to provide input during the public comment portion of the agenda. I'll now transition to baseline greenhouse gas emissions for space and water heating used in California. Space and water heating represent about 80% of greenhouse gas emissions in buildings. These two end uses currently comprise over 25 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents annually as of today, and the residential sector has more than double the emissions from these two end uses than the commercial sector. This slide underscores the significant emission reduction potential that can be realized under a zero-emission space and water heater standard. For this regulation, we will use NOx and PM 2.5 reduction estimates to calculate health benefits, both by air basins and statewide. We expect that moving towards zero-emission space and water heaters will reduce air pollution, leading to fewer illnesses and premature deaths. CARB's health benefits analysis will include 12 health endpoints. These include cardiovascular, respiratory, and neurological health outcomes, especially for those that affect our most vulnerable populations, children and seniors. CARB staff are conducting an assessment to determine the technology availability for zero-emission space and water heaters, and have been consulting public experts on current and future trends for these technologies. Our goal for public input today is to receive recommendations on data sources for assessing status and availability of emerging zero-emission technologies. Key questions considered in our analysis include: what zero-emission technologies are commercially available? What is the current and future rate of deployment of zero-emission technologies in California? And what are the special considerations, applications, and limitations of zero-emission technologies available today, and how are these expected to change over time? This slide highlights some examples of zero-emission water heater technologies, their current status, and key considerations. Electric resistance water heaters are available and serve a wide variety of residential and commercial building types, but typically have high operating costs and slow heating times. Heat pump water heaters are also commercially ready and widely available. The emergence of 120-volt products can serve as a solution to reducing panel capacity concerns for retrofit applications, and the development of central heat pump water heaters are expected to increase uptake of heat pumps in large commercial buildings. Key considerations for heat pumps are their high capital costs, low operating costs, larger storage tanks than traditional units, and condensation removal and ventilation needs. Capital costs are expected to decrease for these technologies, however, as their adoption rates begin to increase. Solar thermal water heaters are commercially available as well, but have limited deployment, limited site feasibility, and high maintenance requirements. Hydrogen combustion and fuel cell water heaters are not currently available in the United States. Both require sufficient hydrogen fuel availability, and hydrogen combustion may emit smog-forming NOx. This slide highlights some examples of current zero-emission space heater technologies. Electric resistance space heaters include electric furnaces and large commercial boilers that can provide both space and water heating. These technologies, however, have high operating costs and may also have slow heating times. Multiple types of space heating heat pumps are available today, including packaged and central split systems, ductless mini splits, which can ease retrofit burdens for homes that don't currently have ducted systems, and variable refrigerant flow systems for large commercial buildings. Some considerations for heat pumps include their low operating costs, high capital costs, and roof area limitations for packaged systems. Space heating heat pumps may also experience efficiency losses in cold climates. However, technology advancements have allowed several manufacturers to begin offering products meeting ENERGY STAR cold climate certifications, which certifies that the equipment can operate efficiently when temperatures are at 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Heat recovery chillers are another available technology for heating large commercial buildings and have low operating costs, but require significant simultaneous heating and cooling loads to be effective. And hydrogen technologies for space heating have similar considerations as hydrogen technologies for water heating and are not currently available in the United States. Though zero-emission options are commercially available, we see that California is far behind other states in deployment of zero-emission space and water heaters. So let's start with water heaters. 2020 data from the Energy Information Administration shows 46% of homes in the United States use zero-emission water heaters as their primary source of water heating, while the average in California is only 19%. Only Utah has a lower percentage at 15%. Looking at space heating, only 3% of homes in California use central heat pump space heaters, one type of zero-emission technology, as their primary source of heating, which is well below the national average of 13%. 5 states have over 30% of residences using central heat pump space heaters. To encourage adoption in California, Governor Newsom set a goal of 6 million heat pumps deployed in the state by 2030. In October of 2023, 10 of the world's largest manufacturers, distributors, and suppliers of heating and cooling equipment signed a commitment to help achieve this goal. For more information regarding some of the key data sources we intend to use in our technology assessment, please see the links and descriptions below. One data source I would like to highlight is the manufacturer survey we released. We appreciate the manufacturers that responded, and would also like to thank AHRI for their help in distributing the survey. So I'll now pass it back to Dana to describe our building readiness assessment.
Thank you, Sam. Today's goal for sharing the approach for building readiness assessment is to receive recommendations on the guiding questions, the methods, and data sources. We would also like to gather feedback on the proposed building readiness categories and definitions. There will be an opportunity to gather feedback or to provide input on these building readiness features during our public comment portion of the agenda today. Our main guiding questions are to identify the ratio of existing buildings that can accommodate zero-emission space and water heaters, including the adequate electrical panel capacity, ample physical space at the panel, adequate electrical wiring, service entrance capacity, sufficient physical space, and structural integrity. We are evaluating these readiness features by building type, vintage, and region. We note that our analysis to date has focused on technologies already common and available today. So now that I've introduced these readiness features, we'd like to check to see if you have any comments on these features. So we do have a poll that people can participate in. We have 2 questions here, really one key question with a follow-up response. But in your opinion, how important is each readiness feature? So you should be able to see a list of readiness features, and you can select whether or not it's important, very important, most important, somewhat important, or not important. So if people are able to start logging in their opinion on how important these building readiness features are, it would be really helpful for us as we're thinking through our staff analysis work. So thanks to the people who are logging in their responses. I see a number of people are participating in the poll right now. We'll give it just one more minute for people to add in their opinion on this. If there are other features that are important, we do have a fill in the blank for you to describe what that other feature is that's important that we should be considering. So I see a few people have identified some other features as well. Looks like our polling responses might be slowing down. We'll give it one more minute here. Okay. Great. Thanks, everybody. I think at this point, maybe we will go ahead and close the poll or end the poll and share the responses. Okay. Okay, it looks like adequate panel capacity is most important to people, followed by ample physical space at the panel as being very important as well. So thanks everybody for responding to this polling question. We definitely appreciate you sharing your perspectives on that. So we can stop sharing that poll and move on to the next slide. So what do we already know about building readiness? We do know that electrical panel wiring and service entrance upgrades may be needed to install some zero emission options. Most homes with 200 amp panels can accommodate zero emission space and water heaters, no problem. Homes with 100 amp panels can also install zero emission space and water heaters, especially with smart solutions like circuit sharing devices. Sufficient physical space is needed for efficient operation of heat pump water heaters to provide adequate airflow. So here's a flow chart that shows our overarching methodology for assessing building readiness. These building readiness features were identified based on literature review, trainings, and public expert feedback. The scope of the building readiness assessment is really based on statewide estimates. We're not planning to analyze every building in the state. However, we are planning to estimate the ratio of buildings by building type and region that have certain features, including the type of equipment, air conditioning, wiring condition, roofing condition. And these estimates are going to help us determine the ratio of buildings that meet readiness features such as the electrical panel capacity, adequate wiring, structural integrity. Then we will identify the ratio of buildings by building type and region that are ready, maybe ready, and likely not ready. This information or these estimates are going to feed into both our cost analysis as well as our equity analysis. So we are considering 3 readiness categories, ready, maybe ready, and not likely ready. We are defining ready as needing brief action at a low cost to install zero-emission space and water heaters. For example, a household could install a load sharing device and would not need electrical panel or wiring upgrades to be ready to install zero-emission space or water heaters. Maybe ready refers to needing moderate action at a moderate cost to install zero-emission space and water heaters. For example, moderate action may include upgrading an electrical panel to be ready to install zero-emission space or water heaters. Not likely ready refers to needing significant action and high cost to install zero-emission space and water heaters and a long time frame. For example, some buildings may need utility infrastructure upgrades that may require a minimum of a couple of months to be ready to install zero-emission space and water heaters. So those are the proposed categories and definitions we're thinking through. Here's a summary of several data sources that we'll be relying on for the building readiness assessment. There are certain aspects of each data source that connect to each of the building readiness features. For example, we are looking at the residential appliance saturation survey, the commercial end use survey to estimate equipment installed in certain building types, which will help us to estimate electrical panel capacity, wiring, and sufficient physical space. We are also looking to Dun & Bradstreet and CoreLogic data to estimate wiring condition, physical space limitations, and roofing conditions to determine structural integrity. There are several other data sources listed here. And for more information regarding some of the key data sources used in our building readiness assessment, you can follow the links here on this slide. And just as a reminder, our slides are going to be posted online and can be referenced for public comments as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Chi to describe our cost analysis work.
All right, thanks, Dana. So today's goal for sharing the cost analysis work are to receive recommendations on our analysis approach. So additional cost elements we should consider in our analysis and the associated data sources. The cost analysis that is guided by the following questions. The first question is, what are the statewide overall costs and the benefits, and how cost effective is the potential circuit?
Chi, my apologies to interrupt. I'm having trouble hearing you, and I'm wondering if that's just me or if others are having a similar hard time hearing. Can other folks hear Chi okay? Okay, I think other people are having a hard time hearing you, Chi.
Okay, so okay.
That's a little bit better. Do you want to
Can
give
you hear
it another?
me now?
We can hear you now. That's better. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So let me just start with the, very beginning. So yeah, I think the cost analysis that staff conducts is guided by the following questions. Okay, Okay. Yeah. So the first question is what are the statewide overall costs and the benefits, and how cost effective is the potential regulatory proposal? We just stop the video share.
Yeah, there you go.
Better.
Why don't you give it a try, Chi? And if we can't hear you, then Maggie can present these slides. So let's try one more time with your
Okay.
video off.
Okay. I'm using a different source of the microphone. Can you hear me now?
Much better. Thank you, Chi.
Sure. Thanks. So sorry about that. So let me just explain again. So the cost analysis that STEP conducted is guided by the following questions. So the first question is, what are the statewide overall costs and the benefits, and how cost effective is the potential regulatory proposal? The second question is, what are the overall ownership costs and the financial implications for consumers, including business and individuals? I think in the following two slides, I will describe our methodologies. Next slide, please. CARB staff will use both top-down and the bottom-up approach to assessing both overall statewide cost and the cost to consumers, including the business and the individuals. So both approaches utilize the data and the results from each analysis focus area, including technology, building readiness, and equity. So in the top-down approaches, we consider possible cost elements and apply the energy demands and the new equipment installations based on CARB's emissions inventory modeling work. We then quantify the overall cost and the microeconomic impacts to California and evaluate the cost effectiveness of the proposal. We also note that the cost and the financial implications varies depending on the climate and the regions, building conditions, energy profile, and the selected energy rate. Staff will apply a bottom-up methods to focus on ownership costs and the financial implications for individuals using data from case studies or high granular energy modeling data developed from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Results of the bottom-up cost analysis will help us fill in the information gap from the top-down statewide analysis and better inform implementations of the regulations. So we consider possible cost elements in the analysis when zero-emission space and water heaters are installed due to the regulations. The cost elements including the equipment, installations, operations including maintenance and energy bill, and the required building retrofits, which may include the upgrade or upsizing of the building electric systems or other configurations, as my colleague Dana just discussed in the previous sections of the building readiness. For more information regarding factors for each element in our analysis and their data source, please see the link and the description below. So now I would like to check in to see how important each potential cost elements is to you. And I'm going to run a short pause to gauge the public perspectives. So now you can see the pause on your poll. So the question is, in your opinion or experience, how important is each potential cost element? So we have four options. The upfront, including the equipment, upfront for installations, operation for the maintenance, and also for the energy bill. And also the last one is the retrofit for building readiness. If you have other elements not covered in this table, so please select others and leave your thoughts in it. Okay, so I will wait a few moments for everyone to share their thoughts and opinions. Okay, Yes, there's some more inputs coming in. So just wait for another minute. All right. Okay. So we will have another 30 seconds. Okay. Since the polling response is slowing down, so we are going to share the result. So, okay. All right. So yeah, we are closing the poll. So as we can see that, yeah, I think the most people thinks that the upfront installations and the energy bill, I think that's cover roughly, 1/3 of the the participants will be think this is very important, and almost maybe I think 60% or 70% of the attendees thinks that the energy bill is not. Oh, okay. So that's the energy bill and the building readiness are very important, as well as the installations. Yeah. All right. Cool. So yes, okay. So that's the things, and we also have some response regarding for the other options. So yeah, so we are encouraging you to share more about your perspectives on these topics in public comments today and after the workshop. So thank you very much for sharing your feedback and the input. So now I'm passing it over to Emma to describe our equity analysis work.
Thank you, Chi. So equity considerations are top of mind for many in the public and are a core through line in all of our staff analysis work. Our approach to equity analysis is threefold. We're considering how potential rule implications could vary across regional contexts, the influence of different utility costs and incentive access on affordability at the household and small business level, and the broader complementary policy and program landscape that would support a regulation achieving its intended public benefits. So commenters on the zero-emission space and water heater concept in the state SIP strategy and the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee comments on the 2022 scoping plan requested heightened levels of public engagement due to the potential adverse impacts on vulnerable groups, such as low-income renters experiencing high housing cost burdens and low housing security. Therefore, one goal of this analysis is to better understand how many households in the state could face such risks. And in implementation planning will also involve those with expertise in domains of policy and practice that fall outside of CARB's jurisdiction, but could influence the eventual outcomes of potential standards, such as protective housing policies. So for example, this map shows the boundaries for the Geographic Area Index, or GAI, which is the spatial unit of analysis for our modeling of potential zero-emission space and water heater adoption. GAI are the intersection of county, air district, and air basin boundaries, and there are 69 total of these polygons in the state. So this map shows GAI shaded to reflect the share of households in that region that are both under 80% of the area median income and that spend over 50% of their income on housing costs. This is based on the housing and urban development data used to construct the housing burden characteristic in the Cal EnviroScreen tool. So statewide, these households are 18% of households. And this percentage is highest at 19% around LA County and lowest in Kings, Placer, and Madera counties at around 8 to 10% and more rural parts of the state. And if we look at the slice of households in that group under 80% area median income, and above 50% high housing cost burden that also rent their home and live in a building that was built before 1970, that's about 400,000 households, or 3% of households statewide. So as Sam and Dana complete their emissions modeling and building readiness assessment, the equity analysis will join these outputs to other available spatial data to describe the share of zero-emission space and water heater adoptions that could occur in contexts where households, communities, and businesses are more vulnerable or overburdened. So I just shared one example of how we could describe this vulnerability in terms of housing costs, building age, and income. And moving forward, we'll be working with public experts to review other potential definitions and data sources to conduct a regional analysis and help us identify potential outputs and metrics of interest for understanding equity. And as she discussed previously, the equity analysis will also connect to the bottom-up cost analysis, where we'll construct more detailed case studies about potential impacts to give context to the broader regional distributional analysis. So this table shows some of the other data sources we'll bring in and apply to inform our understanding of different adoption contexts and how potential opportunities and challenges could vary regionally. So this will include, to the extent feasible, demographic, built environment, climate, and fuel source characteristics. In developing this analysis, we're also reviewing existing metrics, such as the climate vulnerability metric developed for the 2022 scoping plan analysis, and the CalEnviro tool that designates disadvantaged communities. We'll be seeking further guidance on dimensions and data sources to include, and how to appropriately identify vulnerable and overburdened communities in this analysis. We also have an equitable building decarbonization study contract with the University of California at Los Angeles for supporting many areas of this analysis, as they're investigating service panel capacity in buildings statewide, availability of and access to incentives, and a survey with a focus on renters and multifamily housing. Next, as my colleague Chi just discussed, we'll develop a handful of in-depth case studies that accommodate some additional nuance and sensitivities that can't be expressed in a statewide model, such as different utility rate plans and whether a household has access to incentive and rebate programs. Again, we'll look to your comments in response to this workshop and our public expert group to advise us on critical case studies to examine to better grasp the everyday financial implications of a potential standard, as well as the program and policy supports available to defray upfront and ongoing costs and mitigate other unintended adverse consequences. And finally, we recognize that many equity concerns arise from chronic inequities in access to affordable, healthy housing and clean air. CARB is but one player in a much broader regulatory program implementation and business landscape. So as we develop a stronger understanding of potential outcomes, we'll work with other agencies, programs, and organizations to identify potential approaches for mitigating adverse unintended consequences and realizing a potential regulation's intended benefits. There's also a great deal to learn from existing programs and policies. We've contracted with a team at UC Berkeley to study the existing housing decarbonization program implementation landscape through a participatory action research project. And we're eager to learn from their insights about how these kinds of programs can work to advance equitable processes and outcomes. So CARB staff are consulting with experts in housing, workforce, and small business perspectives to help inform our approach to potential implementation planning before the board adopts a regulation. Although no regulatory action is final until a board decision, based on our assessment interview learnings, we recognize the importance of getting a head start on these important questions and having a solid plan for next steps to the extent possible in the event that the board does approve a regulatory recommendation. We'll also continue to work with staff at other agencies to understand potential approaches for realizing the regulation's intended benefits. In a preliminary implementation report developed in collaboration with public experts, we'll describe these initial findings and recommendations for future work around key implementation-related topics, including housing, workforce, incentives, and other supportive policies. So in concluding the presentations on staff analysis, we'd like to step back and give you an opportunity to weigh in at the broadest level around your thoughts on the important questions for us to approach. So once everyone stops their screen share, so you've just heard from us around technology options, building readiness, costs, and equity. So we'll share a word cloud style poll, which should now be visible on your screen. You can join by following the link to slido.com and entering the code 397443. Or you can use your cell phone to scan the QR code visible on your screen to join the poll from your mobile device. So you should have the ability to fill in your response to an important question that CARB staff should consider. Great, I see some answers coming in. So yeah, you can add a word or a full question. So the words affordability, urgency, equity, feasibility, public awareness are really prominent. Seeing questions about grid reliability and infrastructure. So although we can't read out and share every response, CARB staff will be tracking the information that you're sharing through this exercise now as we're taking in the feedback from this workshop process. So it's really helpful just to get an initial visual sense of the thoughts that are in your mind from those who are participating in today's workshop. So now that we've invited you to provide some initial reflections via text in this word cloud activity, this will bring us into our public comment period where folks will have an opportunity to share their thoughts verbally, and we'll also address some of the questions that you've submitted via the Q&A feature. So with that, I'll invite my colleague Sam to facilitate our public comments.
Great, thank you, Emma. Yeah, so let's now transition to overall questions we have for the public to help guide our analytical work. So we are especially looking for answers to the following questions, but we are open to any comments or questions you may have. For regulatory concepts, what aspects of the regulatory concept seem feasible, which seem challenging, and why? And please provide data to help support the development of these concepts. For technology, are there any recommended data sources for assessing the status and availability of emerging zero-emission technologies? For building readiness, are there any comments on the proposed approach, readiness features, categories, and definitions? For our overall cost analysis, are there recommended additions to cost elements and their data sources? For the regional equity analysis, are there any other recommended questions for staff to explore as they evaluate equity implications and/or reports and data sources that they should reference? And for affordability case studies, what specific case studies should staff analyze, such as renter impacts, small business impacts, or others? We will also be accepting written comments. So now we'll be moving into public comments. For online attendees, if you are interested in providing verbal public comments, please use the raise hand feature in the Zoom toolbar. Once your name is called, please unmute yourself by clicking the red button and proceed to introduce yourself. Phone attendees should dial *9 to raise or lower your hand and dial *6 to mute or unmute. Please send any questions regarding technical difficulties to buildingdecarb@arb.ca.gov. I will let everyone know who the next 3 commenters are. Once it is your turn, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself and your affiliation. So currently we have 2 speakers in the queue. So I'll first be calling on Archie De La Cruz and then Michael Corbett. Archie, please unmute yourself and state your name and your affiliation and your comment.
Sorry, I actually did not raise my hand, so I apologize for asking to speak.
No problem at all. Thank you. So I'll move on to Michael Corbett, and then we'll do Megan Leary and Brett Andrews. Michael Corbett, please unmute yourself and make your comment.
Thank you, Sam. My name is Michael Corbett with Bradford White Corporation. We are a manufacturer of water heating and space heating equipment. I just wanted to provide one general comment, which I think touches on all of the themes here that staff is asking for input on, which is this entire presentation seems overly focused on the residential sector and very, very limited focus on commercial sector. And specifically commercial sector, including restaurants, retail, small business. This is an area where there are a lot of different types of products, a lot of different types of applications, much limited space, probably some equity concerns in certain communities. And this is an area where we would largely encourage staff to do a much deeper dive in terms of market readiness for zero-emission technology. And less focus on the residential sector, which is currently seems to be the highlight of the presentation. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yeah, we are definitely considering residential and commercial in our analysis, but we would definitely encourage you to follow up with written comments related to that effect, and particularly any sort of data sources that you would think would be particularly informative for CARB to consider as we develop this rulemaking. We definitely appreciate that. So thank you, Michael. I will now move to Megan Leary. Megan, please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Megan Leary. I'm from the Emerald Cities Collaborative based in the Bay Area. We're a CBO that does contractor development and equitable implementation for decarb policies in the Bay Area. My question is around the equity analysis and building readiness assessment. I was wondering to what extent the availability of qualified contractors to perform retrofits and installation is considered in either of those categories. And additionally, if there are plans for buildings or households that are identified as not likely ready under building assessment and very vulnerable under the equity analysis, if there is any plan around an incentive program for folks who fall into both of those categories, if there's the overlap.
Yeah, thank you, Megan, for your comment. And then I'll invite Dana Waters and Emma Tomei to help respond to that. Dana is helping lead our building readiness assessment and Emma on our equity analysis. So Dana or Emma, did you have anything you'd like to respond to?
Thanks, Sam, and thanks for that question regarding qualified contractors. I think that's a good question. I think we need to look into that a little bit more and would welcome any suggestions that you might have along those lines for us. I don't know, Emma, if there's more that you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Dana. I would share, I appreciate the question, and I think contractor availability is a really important issue. It's also fairly challenging to measure. So we're really interested in potential data sources or studies that can help us better understand that topic. I'll say also that one of our listening session partners is the Construction Trades Workforce Initiative. So later this year, they've generously partnered with CARB to co-host a listening session with a focus on reaching the contractors and installers that go through their training programs. And we're eager to develop more partnerships in thinking about potential implementation when we arrive at that phase of this work. So thanks for that question. Megan, I think you also asked about what happens for those households that are sort of at the intersection of living in a building that might not be ready based on our readiness characterization, and also our low income and high housing cost burden. So we agree that we need to be really attentive to and sensitive to the needs of these kinds of populations. As many folks are aware, the CEC has a rural building decarbonization incentive program. I think their solicitation workshop is happening in a couple weeks in mid-March, where they're going to be gearing up for developing the process for soliciting program administrators for several $100 million in funding that they have for reaching precisely those populations. And in our analysis, we're thinking about, well, what potentially are those households that would be not served even in the presence of the Equitable Building Decarbonization Program. There's other programs like the tech program, which have incentives both for market rate and for low-income households. And so part of the focus of studies like the one UCLA is conducting and that we're also doing internally is trying to understand, what's the overall coverage of the incentive landscape and what gaps might remain that we'd need to be really thoughtful about when it comes to implementation planning. So I hope that helps address parts of your question, and we're happy to follow up and really, encourage others with expertise on these topics to reach out to us and be in conversation with us as we're doing this work.
Great, thank you, Emma and Dana. So I see we have 7 more hands raised in the queue. The next 3 are going to be Brett Andrews, Tom Cabot, and Laura Petrillo-Grow. So I'll start with Brett Andrews. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you for this excellent workshop. My name is Brett Andrews. I'm a physician and member of San Francisco Bay Physicians for Social Responsibility. And I wanted to mirror Megan Leary's concern that we pay attention to having a sufficient quantity of workforce to do these installations and ensure that that is not a factor that is driving up the cost because we have equity concerns for installation. This would be potentially a very large factor. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for your comment, Brett. Let's see, Tom Cabot, please go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Thank you. I'm Tom Cabot, an energy engineer in the Bay Area, volunteering for a number of different groups. Both Megan and Brett, who spoke recently about this, were mentioning workforce concerns. And those, the amount of workforce it takes to do these installations is a function of how they are done and what paths are chosen for them. So the thing I was thinking you ought to look at carefully in the cost assessment is really evaluating the power efficient approach to putting these appliances in, picking the more power efficient versions that require smaller circuits and don't tend to lead to panel upsizing. And so those types of devices, especially the new 120 volt plug in the wall shared circuit heat pump water heater, can be installed by a homeowner, just like just like a gas water heater was able to be installed by a homeowner. So they are simple devices. And so there are simple paths through this. And we ought to look at those paths when assessing the cost and the proportion of the population that may pick expensive paths using a lot of workforce and the proportion of the population who might choose an affordable path. And then I put another question in about considering a seventh question to ask yourself about the technologies, and that is what type of enabling actions can CARB take to help other agencies prepare for a more power efficient approach to electrification that reduces the need for excess workforce?
Yeah, thank you, Tom, for your comments. I'll again invite my colleague Emma Tomei to help respond to the power efficient question.
Sure, thanks, Sam. Okay, so Tom, I'm going to hit answer live so that folks can read the question that you posed via the chat. And thanks as always for sharing your insights with us. So the question that you wrote was, how might we structure ancillary rules, policies, and incentives to appropriate parties to encourage the more power efficient versions of zero emission appliances to ease the rapid adoption of widespread electrification? And so for that question, I want to invite my colleague Dana, as well as Christina Boudreau to unmute to offer some responses.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. We really appreciate this comment. It's definitely something that I'm thinking about with the building readiness assessment. We definitely want to be thinking about these types of options as people are installing zero emission space and water heaters. This is definitely an approach to avoid some electrical panel upgrades. So we will keep that in mind as we're moving forward with that assessment and look to you for any other specific guidance that you can provide to us on that. So thanks for sharing that and reminding us of that approach.
And thank you very much for your comment. This is Christina Boudreau with Legal. So with respect to the efficiency, we certainly want to consider that. We also have to be conscious that that is within the scope of the California Energy Commission. So that is really their realm, is the efficiency of a particular appliance. So we do appreciate the comment and we will keep that in consideration.
Great. Thank you again for your comment. I see we have 7 more hands raised in the queue. We'll move to Laura Petrillo-Grow, followed by Robert Zorling, and then Christopher Chavez. So Laura, Please go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you now, yes.
Oh, thank you. So, my name is Laura Petrillo, and I am trying to figure out why my sound is echoing. Can you hear that?
We can hear you, Laura.
Okay, sorry, must be on my end. Okay, so I represent AHRI, I'm Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs. AHRI is a trade association representing more than 330 manufacturers of heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration and water heating equipment. AHRI is an internationally recognized advocate for the industry and develops standards for and certifies the performance of many products manufactured by our members. In the United States alone, the HVACR and water heating industry supports more than 704,000 jobs and more than $211 billion in annual economic activity. So I would like to thank CARB staff for all the work you've been doing.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Laura. I think we're starting to lose your audio. It's getting really quiet.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, that's much better. Thank you.
I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the work of CARB staff for listening in these sessions. We can see how much the analysis is changing in response to these listening sessions, and think that you all are doing a great job focusing the issues and the questions. So just first wanted to get that thanks out of the way. Second, I'd like to echo Mr. Corbett of Bradford White and his comments regarding disaggregating the commercial and residential spaces. There are, as you've noted, many more opportunities in the residential space, and reviewing some of the statuses and considerations for space and water heating separately in the residential and commercial spaces may be helpful as you look through your regulatory approaches that are being proposed. In terms of technology, there may be some advantage to disaggregating some technologies as well. For example, there have been some noted additional considerations that may need to be accounted for when you look at integrated heat pump water heaters. Third, we also recommend some additional disaggregation for existing buildings. There may be some complications where you're looking at massive changes to system types. For example, moving from central heat pump water heater systems to heat pump water heaters serving individual units. The same could be true on the space heating side. And lastly, I'll note that the Advanced Water Heater Initiative has just recently conducted a session on water heating, and it was very interesting to see some of the pilot projects that they've been conducting and where there are unexpected outcomes in terms of savings on energy and cost, for example, where you would have expected more or lower operating costs for certain heat pump technologies. So unfortunately, I was not able to attend that session, but we will see if we can provide some additional context and resources in written comments. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Laura, and definitely appreciate your comments on looking to further disaggregate some of these technology types and use cases and differences in existing versus new buildings. Definitely do appreciate you following up with a written comment related to that. It'd be very helpful for us as we go through our analytical work. So thank you again. So I see we have 6 more hands raised in the queue. I'll move to Robert Zwirling, followed by Christopher Chavez, and then Sasan Sadeh. So Robert Zwirling, please go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Good morning, and thank you for the workshop, and special thanks to you, Sam, for pronouncing my name correctly.
I'm glad I got it right. Thank you.
You did. Thank you. So I'm Robert Zwirling. I'm from Induction Heating AI. We are a startup that's developed an electric, magnetic induction and artificial intelligence water heater that's low cost to install and operate at 120 volts. So my question is, as an emerging technology, how do we, as well as other emerging technology companies that support electrification and zero emissions, get your consideration, get on your radar? How do we get to interface with you? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. I think a great way to engage on the slides, and I'll discuss this after our Q&A period, but there's a link to our docket and also a link to our Building Decarb email. I would encourage you to reach out probably via the email, and we can have further discussions with you related to your items. So yes, thank you, Robert, for your comments. I think I'll take maybe 2 more verbal comments, and then I do want to respond to some of the written comments that are coming in via the Q&A. So Christopher Chavez, we'll take your comment, and then Sasan will follow with yours before moving to the written, responding to written comments. Christopher, I've gone ahead and asked you to unmute, so please go ahead and provide your comment.
Great, thank you. This is Chris Chavez, Deputy Policy Director at Coalition for Clean Air. Just very briefly, we want to state our support for building decarbonization efforts, considering that buildings are a large source of both greenhouse gas emissions, but also oxides of nitrogen, which are smog-forming pollutant. I think one thing that we definitely would agree with is willing to make sure that we have that focus on equity and really helping out low income and disadvantaged communities with the transition. I mean, even, for my own case, I live in a older apartment building, about a 70-year-old apartment building with its, I think, original 4-breaker panel. So certainly, upgrading will be a challenge in that environment. I think perhaps maybe what might be helpful is additional discussions or further discussions focused specifically on multifamily housing, particularly older multifamily housing, considering that's where a lot of low-income and disadvantaged community residents live in. But overall, again, just want to state support for building decarbonization efforts, and look forward to continuing to engage in this process.
Yeah, Christopher, thank you. I really appreciate your comments. I'll ask Emma Tomei if there's anything they would like to add. Emma, again, leading our equity analysis and looking at low-income issues. Emma, anything you'd like to respond to live?
Oh, yeah, yes, thank you, Christopher, for underscoring those issues, and just really appreciate your interest and attention. Please feel free to reach out if you want to be in more conversation with us. We are planning to share more details about our equity analysis approach in upcoming meetings, and would be happy to hear more from you about your thoughts on this topic. So thanks again for being here.
Great, and thank you, Emma. All right, so we'll do one more verbal comment, and then we'll move to the written questions and answers. So Sasan Seidat, please go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Sasan Seidat with Earth Justice. Really glad you all are kicking off this process, and excited to look at the regulatory concepts and to dig in the different emissions and cost assessments that you are planning. I just wanted to note two things. First, that we strongly support that all gas end use new sales should conclude by no later than 2030 in order to achieve economy-wide decarbonization. I think it could be really useful to look at the way that certain EU nations have planned the phase out of new gas heating system sales. Many of those countries have announced that all new heating systems in new construction and replacements in existing buildings need to be at a minimum like hybrid heat pumps or fully heat pump electric by 2025 or 2026. So I think there's a lot of examples that we can draw from their experiences, with even earlier milestones. The other things I wanted to say for the cost assessments are, and I don't really have any brilliant ideas about how to model this quantitatively, but I think it would be really important to include, at least as a discussion, is the equity impacts of the costs of not retiring or of, the eventual retirement of the gas distribution system. In other words, that yes, there may be high costs associated with installing new equipment. How do those costs compare to what we think would be likely substantially higher costs of safely maintaining an aging gas system that needs to be, shut down eventually if we're going to meet economy-wide decarbonization? And what would be the equity impacts of costs for those customers remaining on that aging gas system? And then also in a similar vein, I know that the city of Berkeley, for example, did an existing buildings electrification strategy back in 2021, where they looked at layering the costs of appliance electrification with other whole home retrofits. So sort of envelope efficiency upgrades or pairing with things like solar and battery for the residential sector could be applied to the commercial sector as well. And found that there could be significant cost reduction opportunities over the life cycle, even though the upfront cost can be higher for those things. And so I know that an emission standard would not require those other whole home retrofit or upgrades, but I think they are a really reasonable and important thing to pair appliance electrification with, and it would be good to include some kind of discussion about the potential for cost savings through those layered strategies. Thanks again for kicking off this process. It's really exciting.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Sasan, for your comment. I appreciate your insights on what's happening in other regions and other countries, and also your thoughts about equity implications for an aging infrastructure system. I would definitely encourage you to follow up with written comments via the docket, which will be on I'll talk more about in a little bit, but it's also incorporated as part of the slide deck. But yes, thank you very much for that. So with that, I think we're going to pause the verbal Q&A for now, and we'll move to some of the written Q&A that's been showing up in the chat. And I'll invite Emma to help facilitate these responses. So thank you, Emma.
Great. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, and I do see there's 3 folks with raised hands, so please do hang tight in the queue. We'll get to your verbal comments just after we have a chance to address some of the written ones that have been waiting. So the first written question we received early on in the workshop was from Neil Matuka, who wrote, will there be planning/policies for supporting training and outreach to technicians and installers for new zero-emission technologies? And for that, I'll hand things over to Dana to share a response.
Thanks, Emma, and thanks, Neil, for this comment. We definitely see training and outreach as a key workforce development complementary policy moving forward. We do know that the California Workforce Development Board is leading the effort in this space. However, we are also including workforce-related issues as part of our implementation planning for the rulemaking as well. So definitely appreciate your comment and look forward to you, continuing to provide that recommendation and appreciate that suggestion.
Thanks, Dana. Okay, next we had a couple questions related to refrigerants and how we're thinking about global warming potential. So the first was, does CARB's assessment of zero-emission technologies account for refrigerant leakages during the expected use of life and the end-of-life equipment? And then relatedly, someone asked also how we're defining zero emissions and how it relates to the global warming potential levels of refrigerants. So for both of those questions, I'm going to pass things over to Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. So the first one regarding refrigerant leakages, so there are state and federal regulations that currently exist for regulating refrigerant leakage, proper recovery, and disposal. And lower GWP refrigerants are already required for space conditioning systems under CARB and also under recently adopted federal regulations. Also add that with the recent passage of SB 1206 in California, which is requiring the use of reclaimed refrigerants for servicing equipment, that will add value to refrigerants and that will therefore minimize leakage and help incentivize increased recovery. So thank you for that comment. I wanted to address the next one on how we're defining zero emission. So we are currently looking or considering defining zero emission as zero greenhouse gas emissions emitted during the operation of space and water heaters. So on-site emissions from space and water heating are a significant source of California's emissions in both the residential and commercial sectors, and represents about 10% of all greenhouse gas emission reductions in the state. So therefore, this regulation is looking at addressing the greenhouse gas emissions at the building level. So we also are aware that with zero emission space and water heaters, including heat pumps, that may result in increased use of hydrofluorocarbon refrigerants, which do have that high global warming potential. As I stated for the previous answer, CARB does have a regulation that's looking to reduce the GWP of refrigerants and space heaters. That is something that we may also consider for the regulatory strategies in this concept for refrigerants that are used in other types of heat pumps, such as water heating. So yes, so thank you very much for those questions.
Great, thanks, Sam. The next question I have here is related to Air District and CARB interactions. So an attendee asked, Air districts currently regulate space and water heaters with local rules. If a statewide regulation is developed, does CARB envision each air district having to amend their respective rules to align with a statewide regulation, emission limits, or would air districts instead rescind their respective rules in light of an overarching state regulation? So to address this question, I'll pass things over to my colleague, Dana.
Thanks, Emma, and thanks for this question. We view the air district rules as complementary. CARB would be using our greenhouse gas authority to regulate space and water heater sales at the state level. Since air district rules regulate NOx, they should be separate from and complementary to CARB's measure. We do not envision any action would be needed on the part of air districts to amend their regional zero NOx rules.
Great, thanks, Dana. I'm just going to turn to a couple of questions that were asked and answered with text responses for folks who might be joining with audio only. So an attendee asked if we're open to using other sources for costs in the Bay Area more accurate cost from SPUR, Peninsula Clean Energy, Silicon Valley Clean Energy case studies, and existing community choice aggregator rebate program data than what's available from the listed upfront cost estimates. And my colleague Chi responded that we are really eager to receive additional cost data from sources, so we'll be setting up a meeting to discuss those resources. Another attendee asked in relation to the map that I shared that displayed housing burden across various GAI in the state, were fixed income considerations considered in the equity map development. Some of the zones with low percent hit me as potentially high retiree population. And so to my best knowledge, fixed income considerations are captured insofar as they're reflected in the underlying American Community Survey data that was used by Housing and Urban Development to develop this quantification of households that fall under 80% of the area median income. So anybody who's curious about the data underlying the map that was shared earlier in the presentation, you can visit the documentation for the Cal EnviroScreen tool on the OEHA website, and that link is included in my response via the Q&A feature. Okay, so I'm going to turn back to one more written question we have here. An attendee asked, I'm a licensed PE who has designed commercial HVAC and plumbing systems on all types of commercial buildings in California. Some existing commercial buildings will be very easy to electrify, easier than residential buildings. Some will be harder. The ease of electrification is directly related first to existing system type and second to occupancy type. There's not a useful existing source for saturation of existing commercial building system types in California. I recommend CARB perform new research on this topic with a specific focus on existing HVAC systems. Is CARB open to performing new research on this topic? So for that, I'll hand things over to Dana again. Thanks, Dana.
Thanks, Emma, and thanks for this comment. I think it's good timing. We just released a request for proposals for a non-residential building readiness assessment. So we are looking at doing additional research in this area because we do see you know, these points that you've raised, that commercial buildings are an area where less information is known and more research is needed. So I encourage people to take a look at that request for proposals. I think we're adding it to the chat. If we haven't already, we will add that to the chat here shortly so that you can take a look at that non-residential building readiness assessment request for proposals. So thanks for raising that comment.
Great. Thank you, Dana. And thanks all who have continued to submit questions via the Q&A feature. We do have until noon scheduled for this workshop, and we'll try to get to everything folks are asking. But for now, I want to hand things back to Sam to get to the handful of folks that are still waiting to make comments verbally.
Yes, thank you very much, Emma. So I see it looks like we just have one hand currently raised in the queue, and that's Edgar Barraza. So Edgar, please go ahead and unmute yourself and make your comment.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, CARB, for this opportunity to speak. My name is Edgar Barraza. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm the Energy Equity Policy Coordinator for Physicians for Social Responsibility LA. I'm also a member of the BEEP Coalition, the Building Energy Equity and Power, that represents renters and low-income communities and communities of colors who are impacted by building decarbonization and the unintended consequences of it. So my comment is that I appreciate CARB's pre-analysis of identifying the public health and affordability and tenant protection key issues, as those are also important issues for the communities we advocate for. Secondly, it is crucial for CARB to help remove the financial barriers for low-income communities to access all electric appliances to be able to comply with the building standard. We also need CARB to ensure that renter protections are in place statewide to ensure that renters are not evicted from their homes through construction process of installing these appliances. I understand that CARB alone can't address these two issues, so I implore CARB to work with other regulatory agencies to help address these issues. And I'll pause there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Edgar, for your comments. And I might pause again and see if Emma wanted to respond live. Emma, again, is heading up our regional equity analysis for this rulemaking.
Edgar, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and being here in the workshop. Really appreciate the concerns that you're raising. And, as you've seen, we are working to do our best to integrate concerns around housing affordability in particular, and looking at that as it intersects with building readiness. And we know that there's more work to do, especially if the board approves a regulation to move forward. That will need to be really dedicated in our implementation planning work to ensure that we are paying attention to what's happening at other agencies, sharing appropriate information with one another, and doing our best to approach the regulation implementation in a way that's really sensitive to all those issues. So grateful to be in ongoing conversation with you about this work.
Great. Thank you, Emma, and thank you, Edgar, for your comment. So I'm not seeing any other hands raised at the moment. Oh, actually, one just showed up. Looks like Sean Armstrong. Sean, please go ahead and unmute yourself and make your comment.
Hello, thank you very much for this proceeding. I'm Sean Armstrong. I'm one of the principals of Redwood Energy, and I'm a specialist in affordable housing. And the request that I would make of you is that when you complete your equity review, and specifically the public health benefits of electrifying, would you consider accelerating the timeline from 2030 to something that's more in keeping with the scale of the health crisis that comes from having the worst quality air in the United States, in Southern California, but also in the Bay Area? The fundamental question is, because I think that the science is already well established that we should have done this work 5, 10, 20 years ago, and 2030 feels like a very long ways away. So thanks for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sean, for your comment. As Dana presented on a little bit earlier in the slide deck, one of the regulatory concepts we are considering does have implementation dates prior to 2030. And we're definitely looking for more feedback on our regulatory concepts, including implementation dates, equipment capacity thresholds, and those sorts of things. So I appreciate your comment, and I would definitely recommend that you follow up with us via the docket. So really appreciate your thoughts on that.
Thank you.
Okay, so it does look like we have no one else in the queue for verbal comments at the time. So Emma, would you like to facilitate the written Q&A?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Sam. Okay, so we've got a question here from Tom Cabot. Will the cost analysis be including the new estimates of social cost of carbon dioxide emissions and social cost of methane emissions, both in state, about 1 to 2%, and upstream of the state, such as the 9% leakage in the Permian Basin, where California's marginal out-of-state gas supply is sourced? So for that question, I will pass things over to Chi.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thanks for your comments and suggestions. I think we consider social cost of carbon using the US EPA guidance and the climate vulnerability matrix CVMs developed in the 2022 scoping plan. So to my understanding, the social cost of the methane would also be including the guidance in the matrix. So we also think the methane leakage is a critical issue. And I think in our emission modeling, we also, including that information regarding the leakage of methane. We definitely keep on track on this issue and continue to refine our analysis.
Great, thank you, Chi. So I want to share a comment and a question from an attendee. They wrote, I'm a San Diegan, having trouble paying my energy bill this month. As PG&E and Sempra continue to increase electricity and gas rates exponentially year over year, we are concerned about the impact of utility rates on our most vulnerable Californians. It's clear that disbanding the shareholder-driven monopolies and democratizing the energy system is key to equitable and low-cost decarbonization. Can CARB help to advance California to a lower-cost future with investor-owned utilities no longer allowed in the state? So thank you to this attendee for sharing this comment, and can appreciate the concerns that you feel about ongoing increases to utility costs. We are integrating the cost of utilities in our costs, both statewide and our individual affordability analyses. However, CARB has no jurisdiction over utilities, so we cannot directly advocate in the manner that you're describing in relation to utilities. I'm curious if my colleague Dana or Chi want to add anything in response to this question.
Yeah, thanks for your comments. Definitely, that's an interesting topics. Yeah, we should consider it. Yeah, I have no other comments to add in.
Okay, thanks very much to this attendee for raising this question. We also received another question from Osma Ali. I hope that I've pronounced your name correctly. They wrote, will you be collaborating with environmental justice and community-based organizations to develop equitable building decarb policies or programs? So I can answer this question from the perspective of our public engagement work. As I shared earlier in the presentation, we held a solicitation in December and January of this year to recruit a wide variety of organizations, some including environmental justice and community-based organizations, to help support us in providing guidance on our staff analysis work and co-hosting listening sessions and in considering potential implementation planning issues and approaches once a regulatory proposal is more developed. As far as developing additional building decarb policies and programs, a lot of that is in the domain of our partner agencies like the California Energy Commission, who, as I mentioned earlier, are about to open a solicitation for the Equitable Building Decarbonization Program. So that's a space I would encourage interested in equitable program design and implementation to participate in and pay attention to in the near term. Of course, as we continue developing this regulation, we're really attuned to and wish to be responsive to the needs of environmental justice groups and community-based organizations. So as we're undertaking this work, really encourage and wish to support your participation in upcoming workshops, in listening sessions, and in these implementation planning discussions. So thanks very much for that question. We've also received a question from an attendee that's asking if renewable fuels will be considered in the zero emission category. And to answer that, I'm going to pass things over to my colleague, Sam.
Yes, thank you, Emma. Thank you for the comment. I actually see a couple of comments in our chat related to the potential use of renewable fuels and making a case here to maybe reserve biofuels for more difficult to decarbonize buildings. So I just want to reiterate that for this rulemaking, what we're currently considering is defining our zero emission standard as zero greenhouse gas emissions emitted during the operation of space and water heaters at the building site. Our focus is on-site emissions of space and water heating because they represent a significant share of the greenhouse gas emissions in the state. So we're looking to focus on reducing emissions at the building site, which would not look at life cycle emissions for different types of technologies. If there are any data or reports that can demonstrate space and water heaters that use renewable types of fuel can operate in a manner that meets that definition of zero emission, we welcome those reports. But currently, we are just looking at on-site emission reductions and not looking at the full life cycle for these different potential fuels. But thank you for your comment.
Great, thank you, Sam. So we have a couple questions from Bruce Hodge related to our cost analysis. And so after I read these out, I'll pass it over to my colleague Chi to respond. The first is the flip side of cost is the source of capital for overall installation costs. Does the analysis include assessment of capital sources, including private and public sources such as green bonds or other financing instruments? And as a follow-on to that previous question, Bruce wrote, will there be an assessment of the ability to offer incentives at a statewide scale and the potential sources of those incentives? Many incentives are offered based on limited budgets that are unlikely to scale.
Yes, thanks very much. That's a great point, and that is a great comment. So actually, we consider the financing programs like the Go Greens or green energy financing or unbilled repayment programs in our, bottom-up approach, analysis. So we basically we will collect as much as we could regarding the case study and apply applicable financing programs to them and trying to calculate the potential implications of their financing burdens or kind of economic implications. So that's a great point. We would love to continue to do that. And if you have more data or information, please, we are looking forward to reach out to you and to receive any kind of comments from you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chi. Next, we have a question from Jim Edelson. Jim asked, do you have data on how many residences have gas water heating alone and electric space heating already installed? Are these instances most appropriate for 120-volt hot water heater retrofits? And for that, I'll pass things over to Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, for your comment. Yes, we do have quite a bit of data showing how many space and water heaters are installed throughout the state that are using different, either gas or electric or other types of technologies. As I presented in one of my earlier slides, we're noting that zero-emission technologies are in California, the deployment is much lower than what we're seeing in other states. And so there's quite a bit of work to get the zero-emission appliances here within California. Your question about 120-volt hot water heater retrofits, yeah, there are some publicly available reports that kind of walk through the different case studies, different uses for those technologies. We see this as a potential technology to help reduce the burden of possible panel upgrades. And if you're looking for more information on 120-volt water heaters, I encourage you to follow up to our Building Decarb email account, and we can certainly point you in the direction of those reports and what the typical use cases are for those technologies. So thank you, Jim.
Great, thank you, Sam. Next, we have a comment from Julie Lindau, who wrote, I would like to raise awareness about the need for families to be able to afford air conditioning and HVAC during heat waves to protect health. Heat waves are the most deadly weather events. And Julie is from San Francisco Bay Physicians for Social Responsibility. So thank you for your comment, Julie. As I noted in the prior regional analysis discussion, we are considering climate data as part of this equity analysis. So we appreciate you raising this issue, and we'll do our best to attend to it. We have one more question here from another attendee who wrote, for emissions comparison, marginal emissions, i.e. emissions from imports of electricity from neighboring states or ISOs to meet additional demand on the grid have to be considered and not just state generation emissions alone. Will this aspect be considered in the analysis, as it's very important and can significantly impact emissions numbers? So Sam, would you be able to take that question?
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the comments. I understand the needs and the differences for where the electricity is being generated, both in state and out of state. I think this is one that we definitely want to keep in mind as we're moving forward with the rulemaking process and how that gets treated. This would be another one I'd flag for written comments if you wanted to provide more information.
Thanks, Sam. I'm not seeing any more written questions here, so if you want to go back and check the hands raised in the queue if there's any, then now's a good time. Thanks.
Okay, so maybe we'll pause for a moment or two and see if there are any additional either written Q&A or raised hands. Right now, we're not seeing either, but we'll pause for a moment or two to if there are any additional comments. Okay, it doesn't seem like anything else is coming in. So thank you all for your thoughtful and constructive comments. We'll also be welcoming written comments after the workshop is over. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you everyone for participating in the workshop today. All the feedback that you provided is extremely useful to us as we continue our public engagement process, our staff analysis work, and as we continue to develop our regulatory proposal. Here's a look at the timeline for the zero-emission space and water heater standards. We plan to hold additional engagement events in 2024 to support us in identifying a regulatory proposal for consideration by the board in 2025, including planning another public workshop for the summer or fall of 2024. Our staff are consulting technical experts through focused meetings on emissions modeling, building readiness, technology, costs, and equity. Starting this summer, we will co-host listening sessions with partner organizations in various regions of the state to hear feedback on regulatory proposals. We anticipate taking a staff proposal regarding zero-emission space and water heater standards to the board for consideration in 2025. So here's a link to our comment docket. Again, we are particularly interested in comments addressing the questions posed earlier, but we welcome all written comments on this workshop. We will be accepting comments until midnight on March 27. There are several ways to stay connected. We have already published some background information and frequently asked questions on our website, which we will aim to keep updated. We'll post more information on CARB's zero-emission space and water heater standards website as we continue developing the standards. We encourage you to subscribe to CARB's Building Decarbonization listserv if you haven't done so yet, and we plan to send messages for upcoming workshops and other engagement events. Finally, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us via email at buildingdecarb@arb.ca.gov. After the workshop ends, you will have access to a 5-question closing survey that will take about 1 to 3 minutes to complete. Sharing your experiences with us today will help us to improve our future workshop offerings. Thank you for all your interest and participation. Our team is looking forward to many more opportunities to involve you all in this process. Your support and participation are greatly appreciated. So thank you again for your time today.